You've probably noticed how men suddenly pursue you more intensely the moment you stop chasing after them, haven't you? Picture this scenario. For weeks, you've been responding to his messages instantly, always being available, showing clear interest. But the more effort you put in, the more distant he became. Then one day you decide to step back. You don't reply immediately, you're busy with your own life. You show less interest. And suddenly, like magic, he starts reaching out more frequently, becomes more attentive, seems more interested. What you just experienced isn't coincidence. It's a deeply rooted psychological principle that Sigmund Freud recognized over a century ago. The human unconscious responds more powerfully to what it cannot have than to what's easily available. Freud taught us that behind every behavior lie unconscious drives and mechanisms. Ignoring isn't manipulation, it's pure psychology. It activates powerful unconscious processes in the male mind: repetition compulsion, projections, competitive instincts, and the idealization of the unattainable. If you want to explore the secrets of human behavior further, subscribe to the channel for more psychoanalytic insights. The first and most powerful signal you can send lies not in what you do, but in what you consciously choose not to do. Imagine this. A man sends you a message. Normally, you'd respond immediately out of politeness, interest, or habit. But this time, you leave the message unanswered. Not out of malice, but from strategic restraint. What happens in his mind over the next few hours? Sigmund Freud recognized that the human unconscious operates according to the pleasure principle. We strive to gain pleasure and avoid displeasure. Yet paradoxically, our desire for something intensifies exponentially when it's denied to us. Freud called this the phenomenon of lack as motivation. What we can easily obtain quickly loses its appeal. What we're missing occupies our unconscious all the more intensively. When you don't respond immediately, you activate a powerful psychological mechanism. The man begins unconsciously pondering, why isn't she answering? Did she see my message? What is she doing right now? Am I not important enough to her? These questions don't arise from rational consideration. They spring directly from his unconscious, which seeks completion and satisfaction. Freud taught us that our mind is permanently occupied with closing open loops. An unanswered message is an open loop. It creates a kind of mental tension that demands resolution. The longer this tension persists, the greater the psychic energy the unconscious devotes to finding a solution. Here's the key. Selective attention doesn't mean completely ignoring a man. It means consciously and strategically dosing your attention. You don't respond to every message immediately. You're not always available. You show interest, but not unconditionally. This selective availability triggers several processes in the male unconscious. First, it activates his competitive drive. When you don't respond immediately, his unconscious interprets this as a signal that you might have other options. Suddenly, he becomes part of an imaginary competition, even though none really exists. Second, it intensifies his projections. He begins projecting qualities and characteristics onto you that make you more interesting and desirable. The brilliant thing about this principle is its authenticity. You're not playing uninterested. You're actually busy with your own life. You have priorities, goals, interests that extend beyond this one interaction. This authenticity makes the signal even more powerful because it's genuine and doesn't seem staged. Freud repeatedly emphasized that authentic behaviors are more deeply anchored in the unconscious than played roles. A man instinctively senses whether your restraint is genuine or if you're just playing games. True selective attention arises from a fulfilled life, not from strategic calculation. The practical application is simple. Respond to messages when it suits you, not when he expects it. Be available for meetings, but not always immediately. Show interest, but make it clear that you have your own life that doesn't revolve around him. Have you ever noticed how a man's behavior changes as soon as you become less available? But selective attention is only the first step. This principle becomes even more powerful when you understand how emotional distance influences attraction between two people, a mechanism Freud identified as one of the most powerful in interpersonal relationships. The second signal is subtler, but even more destructive to his peace of mind. Emotional distance that activates his unconscious projections. Picture this. You're having a conversation with him, but this time you don't immediately share every emotion, every thought, every reaction with him. You remain friendly but reserved, interested but not emotionally invested. You listen but reveal less of yourself. What you're doing is far more than just being reserved. You're activating one of the most powerful mechanisms of human psychology. Freud discovered that people permanently tend to project their own unconscious contents onto others. Projection means we transfer our own desires, fears, characteristics and fantasies onto other people without being aware of it. When you remain emotionally distant, you become a blank canvas onto which he can project his deepest longings. This emotional distance doesn't work through coldness or rejection. It works through what Freud called selective emotional availability. You're there, but not completely there. You show interest, but not your complete emotional world. You smile, but don't reveal all your thoughts. This selective disclosure creates a kind of emotional hunger in the male unconscious. The paradoxical part, the less you emotionally reveal about yourself, the more he'll want to get emotionally closer to you. His unconscious interprets your emotional restraint as a challenge. The unconscious thought emerges, she's different. She's not like other women who immediately reveal everything about themselves. She has depth, secrets, something unfathomable. Freud explains this phenomenon through transference. In emotional relationships, people unconsciously transfer earlier relationship experiences onto new people. When you remain emotionally distant, you may activate earlier experiences with important female reference figures in him. The mother who wasn't always emotionally available, the first love who remained mysterious, the woman he could never quite understand. This transference isn't negative, it's powerful. You transform in his eyes from a concrete person into a symbol, into an archetype of the mysterious, unfathomable woman. And symbols have a much stronger emotional impact than concrete, fully recognizable realities. Practically, emotional distance doesn't mean being emotionally cold. It means consciously dosing your emotional reactions. When he tells you something personal, you listen, but don't immediately tell an even more personal story back. When he tries to provoke you emotionally, you remain calm and composed. When he seeks drama, you give him stability instead of emotional reactivity. This emotional self-control is interpreted by his unconscious as strength. Freud taught that the unconscious permanently seeks strong, stable objects it can relate to. An emotionally controlled woman is unconsciously perceived as more powerful and desirable than one who immediately expresses every emotion outwardly. Here lies another important aspect. Emotional distance creates curiosity. When you don't reveal everything about yourself, there's always something left to discover. Your counterpart can never completely see through or categorize you. You remain a puzzle that wants to be solved, and puzzles occupy the human unconscious far more intensively than open books. Freud emphasized that the unconscious is fascinated by secrets. What remains hidden is automatically valued as more precious. Your emotional restraint isn't interpreted as disinterest, but as a sign that you have deeper layers that need to be discovered first. The application is subtle. Share emotions, but not all of them. React to his stories, but not effusively. Show interest in him, but keep part of your emotional world to yourself. Become a woman who can't be completely understood in 5 minutes. Have you noticed how men become more persistent when you remain somewhat more emotionally enigmatic? But emotional distance alone isn't enough. It becomes even more powerful when you understand why men are unconsciously programmed to chase exactly what they can't have, a behavior Freud described as repetition compulsion. The third signal activates the deepest and most irresistible mechanism in the male unconscious, the compulsive urge to repeat unfinished emotional patterns. Imagine this. A man has spent his entire life pursuing women who haven't given him the attention he desired. His first love was unapproachable. His mother was emotionally distant. The women who fascinated him were always somewhat out of reach. And now he meets you, a woman who is friendly but not pursuing, interested but not needy, there but not completely graspable. What happens in his unconscious? Freud discovered one of the most powerful mechanisms of human psychology, repetition compulsion. This describes the unconscious tendency to repeatedly reproduce earlier emotional patterns and relationship dynamics, even when they were painful or unsatisfying. The unconscious constantly tries to solve unresolved emotional conflicts from the past in new relationships. When you behave unapproachably, you may activate decades-long emotional programming in his unconscious. If he had to fight for his mother's love as a child, if his first great love always just slipped away from him, if he learned that love is something you have to fight for, then you unconsciously become a symbol of all these unresolved longings. The insidious part, the more you withdraw, the more intense his desire becomes. His unconscious doesn't interpret your unapproachability as disinterest, but as a familiar pattern. It thinks, I know this. This is real love. You have to fight for real love. You become the embodiment of all the women he could never quite have, and that's exactly why he wants you all the more. Freud recognized that people are unconsciously attracted to what's familiar to them, even when it's painful. A man who's used to fighting for female attention will feel bored by a woman who gives him that attention immediately and unconditionally. She doesn't fit his unconscious pattern of what love means. Here lies the key to repetition compulsion. The unconscious doesn't seek what's good for us, it seeks what's familiar. And for many men, the experience of having to fight for a woman is deeply familiar. It activates all the emotional mechanisms they connect with love, longing, and desire. This dynamic works particularly powerfully with men who didn't experience unconditional love from a female caregiver in their childhood. Their unconscious is programmed to view female love as something that must be earned, fought for, or conquered. A woman who's easy to have doesn't trigger these deep emotional programs. Practically, this means you don't have to be hard to get, but you shouldn't be too easy to have. You respond to his efforts, but not to all of them. You reward his interest, but not every small sign of it. You show appreciation for his efforts, but make it clear that your attention is something valuable that isn't taken for granted. Repetition compulsion works through intermittent reinforcement. This is a term from learning psychology that Freud integrated into psychoanalysis. Intermittent reinforcement means irregular, unpredictable reward. A slot machine works on this principle. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, but you can't predict when. When you're sometimes available, sometimes not. Sometimes warm-hearted, sometimes distant, sometimes interested, sometimes busy, then you activate the same mechanism. His unconscious becomes addicted to the moments when you give him attention, precisely because these moments aren't predictable. Freud taught us that intermittent reinforcement is the strongest form of psychological conditioning. It's much more powerful than constant reward or constant punishment. It creates a kind of emotional addiction that's hard to break. Do you recognize the pattern? The men who pursued you most intensely were often those where you weren't sure where you stood with them. But repetition compulsion is further strengthened when you understand how projections work and why distance makes you an idealized object of his fantasies in his eyes, a phenomenon Freud described as one of the most powerful forces in interpersonal relationships. The fourth signal transforms you from a real person into an idealized object of his unconscious fantasies, and that's exactly what makes you irresistible. Picture this. You spend time with him but never reveal everything about yourself. You remain friendly but mysterious, interesting but not completely transparent. In his mind, a fascinating process begins. Since he doesn't know you completely, his unconscious starts filling the gaps with his own fantasies. You become the perfect woman, not because you're perfect, but because he projects his own ideals onto you. Freud discovered that people permanently tend to project their unconscious desires, longings, and ideals onto others. Projection is a defense mechanism where we externalize our own psychological contents. But in interpersonal relationships, projection can also mean positive idealization. When you remain emotionally and informationally incomplete, your counterpart will unconsciously endow you with the qualities he most desires. This idealization works on a simple principle. The unconscious abhors emptiness. When information is missing, it invents some. When emotional clarity is missing, it creates some. When you don't reveal all your qualities, he will unconsciously assume that the missing qualities are exactly those he wishes for. The brilliant part: you don't actually have to have these qualities. You just have to not disprove them. If you never talk about your ex-relationships, he'll assume you haven't had dramatic relationships. If you never talk about your insecurities, he'll assume you're confident. If you never talk about your weaknesses, he'll assume you're strong. Freud called this phenomenon object relations. In his understanding, other people are never really other people. They're objects of our unconscious projections. We never love the person as they really are. We love the image we create of them. And the less we know about a person, the freer we are to idealize them. This idealization is further strengthened by what Freud called narcissistic cathexis. This means we often fall in love with people who embody qualities we'd like to have ourselves. When you remain mysterious, he may project his own longings for mystery and depth onto you. When you remain emotionally controlled, he may project his own longings for emotional strength onto you. Practically, this means let him guess. Never reveal your complete story. Never tell all your thoughts and feelings. Remain vague in certain areas. Not out of manipulation, but because mystery and incompleteness are natural aphrodisiacs for the human unconscious. Another aspect of idealization is temporal. Freud recognized that the unconscious tends to idealize past and future experiences, while present experiences are often perceived as ordinary. When you're not always available, the moments he spends with you become idealized in his memory. You don't become habit, but remain something special. This idealization creates a powerful dynamic. You become what Freud called the unattainable object. You're not really unattainable, but you're never completely attainable. You always remain somewhat outside his complete control or full understanding. And that's exactly what makes you a permanent object of fascination. Freud taught that idealized objects have a much stronger emotional impact than real, fully known people. They activate deeper layers of the unconscious. You become symbols for everything he desires, but can never quite have. You embody his deepest longings for the perfect, the mysterious, the unattainable. The application is subtle. Be interesting, but not completely decipherable. Be warm-hearted, but keep emotional secrets. Be present, but never completely available. Become a woman about whom he can still discover new things, even after months. Have you noticed that the men who fascinated you longest were often those you never completely understood? But idealization alone isn't enough. It becomes even more powerful when you understand how unapproachability activates the most primal of all male instincts, the competitive drive and the need to conquer. Drives that Freud identified as fundamental to male psychology. The fifth signal awakens the most archaic instinct in the male unconscious, the conquest drive, activated by the notion that other men might also desire you. Picture this. You're with him, but your phone rings. You look at it, smile slightly and put it away without answering. You don't explain who called. You don't justify yourself. You simply remain present, but let it show that you have a life that extends beyond him. In this moment, you activate one of the most powerful drives of male psychology, the competitive drive. Freud recognized that the male aggression drive, which he identified as one of the two basic drives alongside eros, is closely linked to competition and conquest. This drive isn't destructive or negative, it's evolutionarily anchored and serves self-assertion and survival. In interpersonal relationships, it manifests as a need to conquer, win, and dominate. When you send signals that you're desirable and appreciated by others, you unconsciously activate his competitive drive. His unconscious interprets these signals as indication that you're a valuable object worth fighting for. The more other men could potentially desire you, the more valuable you become in his eyes. The paradoxical part, you don't actually have to have other men or flirt with them. It's enough if you send signals that you're desirable and have options. A confident smile when another man looks at you, a friendly but distant reaction to male attention, the feeling that you're not desperately dependent on his affection. Freud taught that the male competitive drive is already shaped in early childhood through the Oedipus complex. Boys unconsciously learn that they must compete with others for the attention and love of the most important female caregiver, the mother. This early pattern shapes their later relationship to women. They're unconsciously programmed to view female attention as something that must be competed for. This imprinting means a man who gets a woman too easily unconsciously feels that something isn't right. His competitive drive isn't activated. The woman doesn't fit his unconscious pattern of what's valuable and desirable. Only when he senses that other men might also find you attractive do you become the prize worth fighting for. Practically, this works through subtle signals of desirability. You take good care of yourself. You dress attractively. You have an interesting life with social contacts. You're friendly to other people, including men. You show that you have options without aggressively emphasizing or instrumentalizing these options. Freud emphasized that competitive drives shouldn't be activated through direct provocation, but through what he called natural selection signals. This means you simply show that you're a desirable woman, appreciated by others. You don't play other men against him, but you also don't hide that you're an attractive, desired being. Another important aspect is narcissistic injury. When a man notices that you're not completely available or that other men might also desire you, his narcissism suffers a small injury. Freud recognized that such injuries can paradoxically strengthen attraction because they activate the conquest drive. The man wants to prove that he's the one who can win you. This dynamic works particularly powerfully with confident, successful men who are used to getting what they want. For them, a woman who isn't immediately available is an interesting challenge. She activates qualities like persistence, creativity, and willingness to make an effort that have made them successful in other areas of life. The competitive drive is also strengthened by temporal scarcity. When you're not always available, when your time is valuable, when meetings with you are something special, then your attention becomes a scarce commodity, and scarce goods automatically activate competitive and acquisitive instincts. Have you ever noticed that men became more interested after they saw other men giving you attention? But the competitive drive alone can be dangerous if it becomes too intense. That's why the last and perhaps most important signal is proper timing, knowing when you need to dissolve the emotional distance and show him that his conquest attempts have been successful. The sixth and decisive signal determines success or failure. Perfect timing of when you return from distance and show him that his efforts have borne fruit. Picture this. For weeks you've applied the principles: selective attention, emotional distance, targeted unapproachability. He's responded, become more persistent, shows more interest, makes more effort, but now comes the most difficult decision. When do you return from distance? When do you reward his efforts? When do you show him that his conquest attempts have been successful? Freud recognized that the timing of reward is crucial for psychological conditioning. too early reward makes the previous effort worthless. Too late reward can lead to frustration and giving up. Perfect timing requires deep understanding of unconscious learning mechanisms. The principle is reward the peak of his efforts, not the beginning. When he starts making more effort, you remain distant. When he intensifies his efforts, you remain friendly but unapproachable. Only when he shows his maximum engagement, when he really gives everything to win your attention, then you show him that his efforts are successful. Freud called this principle optimally frustrating gratification. This means you frustrate him just long enough until his motivation reaches its peak, then you give him the emotional reward he's longed for. This reward becomes exponentially more valuable because it was hard-won. Practically, you recognize the right moment by several signals. He contacts you more regularly. He makes concrete plans for the future. He shows genuine emotional investment. He's willing to make efforts beyond the normal measure. He asks about your deeper thoughts and feelings. He wants to really understand you, not just conquer you. When these signals come, it's time for emotional return. But this return must happen gradually. Freud taught that sudden drastic behavioral changes can confuse the unconscious and destroy the built-up tension. The return must seem organic and credible. Start with small emotional gifts. Respond a bit faster to his messages. Share something more personal with him. Show more interest in his stories. Be somewhat more available for meetings. But do this gradually, over a period of days or weeks. The key is that your emotional opening seems like a natural reaction to his increased efforts. It should feel as if he conquered you, as if his efforts made you trust and open up to him. This strengthens his self-esteem and emotional connection to you. Freud emphasized that the most successful conditioning is when the person believes they earned the reward through their own efforts. When he feels that he won you through his persistence, charm, and attention, this conquest becomes a lasting success experience that binds him to you. An important aspect of emotional return is authenticity. You can't suddenly become a completely different person. The qualities that originally attracted him, your independence, emotional strength, your secrets, shouldn't disappear completely. You should open up, but not completely expose yourself. The ideal result is a new relationship dynamic where he feels like a successful conqueror, while you remain an interesting, slightly mysterious woman. The tension shouldn't completely disappear, but transform into healthy, lasting attraction. Freud taught that the best long-term relationships maintain a certain productive tension. Total emotional transparency and constant availability can weaken attraction long-term. An element of the mysterious, of the yet-to-be-discovered, should always remain. The practical application: open up gradually, reward his greatest efforts, but maintain your independence. Become a woman who could be conquered, but can never be completely possessed. Do you feel you would recognize the right moment to return from distance? These 6 signals, selective attention, emotional distance, repetition, compulsion, idealization, competitive drive, and perfect timing, are the most powerful psychological tools Freud identified for interpersonal relationships. They work because they activate mechanisms deeply anchored in the human unconscious. These principles don't work through manipulation, but through deep psychological understanding. They respect the unconscious needs of the male mind while you preserve your own emotional integrity. What hidden truth about your own relationship patterns could change your life if you recognized it today? Write in the comments which country you're from. I'm curious how far these universal psychological principles have spread. And if this video gave you new insights, like it and subscribe to the channel for more profound psychoanalytic discoveries.